Well, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here and to be a part of your event. And, I travel the country and oftentimes will speak at law events for lawyers and oftentimes for universities as well, obviously to share our story about going to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I oftentimes like to begin with a different story about our band, also involving law. However, one that begins in a very different place. And that begins at the Oregon State Penitentiary. You see, back in 2011, our band was invited to play at OSP, Oregon State Penitentiary, the federal prison inside our state. Now, as a Johnny Cash fan, I was pretty excited about this moment. I was like, oh, we're gonna wear all black that day, we're gonna kill it. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be our Folsom Prison Blues moment. I didn't really think about what it would mean to send an all-Asian American band into a prison with one of the highest populations of neo-Nazis in this country. Didn't think, hey, this could be a little dangerous. Not as I was signing the waiver saying we wouldn't sue if, I think the word was shanked, or if we got maimed or killed. I was like, you gotta sign this stuff just to go into high school these days. It didn't cross my mind until we were actually going through our second set of metal detectors. It was at that point that we were given these bright orange vests with these large numbers on them, kind of like the kind you would wear if you played flag football in high school. It was at that point that one of the band members says, excuse me, we wear our suits and vests and things when we're playing. Is it okay if we remove these safety vests because it's really hot out right now? And we kind of go through layers when we're playing on stage. Well, the guard looks at us and he says, sure, but if something happens out there, those vests let us know who not to shoot. I'm like, yo, can I get 2 of them vests? At that point, I start getting filled with nervousness and anxiety because I'm like, wait, what do I know about prisons? What do I know about prisoners? Like the only stuff I knew came from books, television shows, movies, film. Like none of these things had good things to say about the prison system. Like this was even before Orange is the New Black was out. So I didn't even think, hey, maybe the prison is kind of this industrial complex that drives white supremacy. I was just like, prison, prisoners, bad place, bad people. And in this case, a maximum security prison, so it had to be the worst of the worst, right? Drug dealers, rapists, murderers. What was I getting myself into? Well, as we walk through the prison, I start, feeling more and more nervous. We get out to this area that they call the big yard. It's the size of a couple of football fields in length. It's surrounded by 30-foot-high walls with sentry towers where you can see mounts for weapons and searchlights. At the end of this field is a small concrete stage. That's where we were supposed to be performing that day. And I noticed that the only thing separating my band from nearly 2,000 inmates were these bright orange safety cones and a thin line of police tape that said, "Police, do not cross." Of course, at that point, I went to the guard and I was like, excuse me, I don't know if they follow these kinds of instructions. I mean, that's why they're here, right? They can't follow instructions, so to speak. And he says, no, it's okay, we got a plan. Well, what is it? He says, if something happens out there, you see that fence behind you, we need you to just drop everything and run through that fence. We'll be on the other side, so as soon as you're clear, we'll secure it. I'm like, okay, let me get this straight. If something happens, like my life is in danger or something like that, you want me to just drop everything and run. You'll be on the safe side, and if we make it through in time, you'll lock it down then? This is what I wouldn't put it like that exactly, but I'm like, where did you get this plan? From watching The Walking Dead? Like, I thought this was a federal institution, one with policies, procedures, one with experience, one that knows how to handle these kinds of situations. But we put our fears aside and took the stage. And something always happens when we begin sharing our music with folks. It's like this magical transformation that when we have a chance to share our art with people, we're not thinking about their criminal status. We're not thinking about, hey, they have finals next week, or maybe we did today, but like what we care about is sharing that moment. And it was incredible because these inmates, this is their only hour of outdoor time that day. They were on such good behavior and having such a good time that the guards doubled their time out there, allowed us to turn our 45-minute set into something that lasted nearly 2 hours. And when we launched into our cover of Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones, we watched as this ocean of orange jumpsuits start jumping up and down.
I see a red door and I want to paint it black. No colors anymore, I want it to turn black. I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes.
At the end of the concert, I'm hanging out by one of the safety cones on the safe side, of course. And I notice as this group of very large white men start approaching me. They're covered head to toe in tattoos, but I can't really make out what they are because I don't really wear glasses when we're playing our rock and roll set. As they get closer and closer, though, there are 2 words I notice emblazoned across the chest of the man in front, and they become abundantly clear: white power. I'm immediately nervous again. I look for my bandmates, and they're 20 feet away from me, breaking down equipment. I look for the guard, the one who's been helping us. He's 50 feet away, breaking up a different fight. I turn back around, and the man is just an arm's length away from me. He looks a bit nervous himself, and then he hands me a paper and a sharp pencil. At this moment, I'm like frozen. I can't think of anything. The only thing playing through my mind is that scene in Jurassic Park where they're like, if you don't move, the T-Rex won't see you. But obviously he already saw me, and obviously it wasn't working. But then he says those few words that cuts right through me. It's for my daughter. Will you please sign it? Like, of course I'll sign it. And I turn it over. It turns out it's a makeshift flyer for our band's performance at that prison. We start having this short conversation, a very unlikely one, but a conversation. Mostly me asking him questions about his daughter, like what grade she's in and that sort of thing, and avoiding questions like, so why are you in here? Because, that seemed kind of obvious. You can't follow instructions. And as we're talking, he says, the fact that you share your music with me and the fact that you would actually talk to me, it's incredible. Like, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but they're ones that I don't want my little girl to make. I want to tell her, I want to show her that I met the band, that I can change. Even though I can't change what's stained into my skin, I could change what's in my head. I could change what's in my heart. We both walked in that day with assumptions. I was literally judging this guy by his skin. But once we actually had a chance to engage, to have a conversation, that's when things were able to change. I started a band called the Slants because I wanted to change people's assumptions about Asian Americans. You see, growing up, I didn't exactly have the best time. This is in the 80s in San Diego, California. And while a lot of people think, oh, that city was so metropolitan, it's so diverse, I was bullied relentlessly. I learned how to run at a young age very, very quickly because I was constantly tormented at school. You see, the only thing that people learned about Asian Americans at the time also came from books, TV shows, and movies. And they also did not have very good things to say. Like, the only characters we had on stage were people like Mickey Rooney taping his eyes back and making this ridiculous accent, people thinking it was funny. Or characters like Long Duck Dong and 16 Candles. You gotta remember, this is decades before Crazy Rich Asians or Fresh Off the Boat was killing it. Like, that was all we had. So I was always ridiculed and being used with these ridiculous stereotypes. Now, there's one particular moment or day that jumps out at me. That's in 7th grade. Back then, after PE, we had different students stay after to clean up the volleyball nets and basketballs and that sort of thing while everyone else would hit the showers. On this particular day, it was my turn, and I thought I was alone. But I very quickly realized I wasn't when I could feel myself being pushed to the ground. It's a very particular feeling. The way it feels to have gravel strike the palm of your hand so hard that they start blistering immediately. As I slid across the ground, I turned around and I saw there are 4 people standing over me. Now, the fact that there's 4 of them usually doesn't bother me. I've outrun 4 before. But this time, they're grinning. They're smiling. They're enjoying this moment. And that's what terrifies me. And very quickly, that's when it began. They began hitting me over and over again, hitting me in the face, throwing sand in my eyes, kicking me in the stomach. I was terrified. And all while they were shouting 2 words again and again. Jap. Gook. I didn't really know what to do until I finally just snapped. I look at them and I'm like, I'm a chink. That's how stupid you are. You can't even be racist properly. They stop, they turn around, and they leave me alone. You see, there's power in claiming an identity. There's power in saying, this doesn't belong to you. You can't use that against me. I get to define who I am. And I think some part of that lesson stuck as I made my way into high school. You see, in high school, I met this guy named Kyle. Now, Kyle and I were best friends. We're inseparable. We went everywhere together. And we were like the original punk rockers at our school, long before there was a Hot Topic even nearby. So the idea of me making this like homemade wallet chain out of safety pins, well, like no one else thought that was cool. But that's how we rolled. And one day, Kyle comes up to school and I see him. He's got bright pink hair in Liberty spikes all over the top of his head. And I'm like, Kyle, you look so cool. That's so punk. Well, no one else at the school agreed. All day long, I was taunted by other people. And the teachers gave him dirty looks all day. I was supposed to meet Kyle after school on this day, and I was running a little bit late, but by the time I got there, it's the front of the school where parents pick up all the kids, a very familiar scene was unfolding before me. Kyle was surrounded by 10 guys, pushing him around. They start throwing words at him, start asking him questions. Well, why do you look like that? Are you some kind of clown or something? What's wrong with you? I knew what that felt like. And at one point, they say, how come your mom lets you walk out the door looking like that? So I decide to answer. I said, hey, maybe it's because his mom's not stupid and ignorant like all of you. Maybe it's because she doesn't judge people by how they look, but instead judges them by their character. I thought this was a very good answer. It was literally like the best answer. But they did not agree. Instead, they turned to me and they start pushing me around. Hey, you want some of this? You want some of this, Jackie? What are you gonna do? Over and over again, they called me that. And I was like, I'm in classes with a couple of you. Like, that's not my name. Over and over again, Jackie, what are you gonna do, Jackie? And that's when I realized they were calling me Jackie Chan. And I was like, man, I'm not Jackie Chan. I don't look anything like him. He's got this busted nose, a goofy grin, but more importantly, Jackie Chan knows something that I do not. He could school all these kids. I took a week of karate camp with my cousins in 5th grade. That was not gonna help me here. But I thought back about that moment in 7th grade, and so I did the only thing I could do. I went back into the memories and thought about the one karate pose I knew from karate camp, and I struck it. And all of a sudden they were, whoa, hey, we don't want to mess with you. We don't want any of that. Simon, right? Yeah, we're in class with you. It was the second time that claiming a stereotype actually helped me. Now, I wish I could say that all of my experiences in school were met with bravery and cleverness, and that I was able to disarm people with all these tools. But that's not how it ended. Most of the time, I ran, I hid, I cried. And in 11th grade, I walked up to my dad. I said, "Dad, I'm ashamed of being Chinese." It broke his heart. My parents worked so hard for me and my siblings, but I didn't want anything to do with my culture. I was tired of just getting bullied relentlessly. It wasn't until I moved to Portland, Oregon, that I started missing it. You see, Portland has this nickname. They call it America's whitest major city. And that's when I was like, man, I miss seeing people who look like me, who can speak any of my first languages, my food. Like, I missed it because I wasn't around it anymore. And so to deal with that loneliness, I would import movies from Hong Kong, like primarily Jackie Chan films, actually, because they're awesome. And around this time period, someone says, "Hey, Simon, you like all those movies, especially the ones about triads and Yakuza, like the Asian mafia. Have you ever watched this movie called Kill Bill?" Who here has seen Kill Bill? A good chunk of you. Okay. I missed it in the theaters, but I can still remember buying it on DVD, watching as this yellow disc of 3 black lions slide into my DVD player. And I began watching it. It's clever, it's funny, it's, a Quentin Tarantino film. RZA did the soundtrack, it's great. But there's this one particular moment where this woman named Oren Ishii walks into a restaurant. She's followed by her crazy 88s. It's the Asian mafia that she had led. Now, to anybody else, this is just another trademark Quentin Tarantino scene. Like, it's in all of his films. Music's kicking, people walk in, you know something's gonna go down. But for me, it was different. Like, I paused the movie right there in the middle of it because I couldn't figure it out. And that's when I realized it was the first time that I had ever seen an American-produced film that showed Asians as cool, confident, and sexy. And I thought, wow, if Hollywood is bad, like the music industry is worse. Music, like the art form that I loved, it was my escape from my torment in school. I used to fall asleep cradling my bass guitar in bed. I dropped out of college to tour in a punk rock band. Like that was the thing I just loved more than anything. But I realized that it wasn't meant for people who look like me in this country. Because out of over 17 million Asian Americans, not one had ever been on the cover of Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Spin, or even got any love from MTV back when they used to play music videos. So it was that night I decided that something needed to change. I would start a band that would provide a bold portrayal of Asian American culture. But here's the thing, if you start a band, like Band 101, you gotta have a name. So I started asking my friends in Portland, remember, America's whitest major city. I started asking them, what's something you think all Asian people have in common? Over and over again, they would tell me, slanted eyes. Slanted eyes? Really? But I thought it was really interesting because I was like, well, first of all, that's not true. Like, not all Asians have slanted eyes. And second, we're not the only people on earth that have any kind of slant to our eyes. But as I thought about it more, it was these eyes, it was this face, this hair that got me beat in school over and over again. I always associated those things with shame. And I knew I wasn't alone. Asian Americans are the most bullied demographic across the school system in America. I knew other people felt the same. So why not change it from associating our eyes with shame to one of pride instead? And I thought, this is great. We could sing about our perspective, our slant on life of what it's like to be people of color while we address and reappropriate this outdated stereotype. So that's how the idea for the Slants was born. Within a couple of months, the reaction was unbelievable. We were on TV in Japan, we had an album out, we were on tour. But more importantly, we started getting all these little messages, handwritten notes from kids across this country, Asian American teenagers saying, thank you. Thank you for existing. Thank you for showing me that I could be something else. Thank you for helping me not be so ashamed anymore, for sharing your own stories of being bullied and letting me know that it does get better. We would take these old schoolyard rhymes and taunts that people used against us and turn them into songs of empowerment instead. There's this one particular one. Me and my singer, we heard this again and again as we were kids. People would pull their eyes back and say, Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. I thought, why not turn this into an anthem of self-pride instead?
We sing for the Japanese and the Chinese and all the dirty knees. Can you see me? We sing in harmony. We sing for the Japanese and the Chinese and all the dirty knees. Can you see me? We sing in harmony.
I could still remember the first time NPR did a story on us. Summer 2008. It was on All Things Considered, saying how there was this Asian American band that was turning stereotypes upside down while building a geek army. Now, they said it was a geek army because we were playing anime conventions back then. All of it was going so well. I realized that, whether we liked it or not, people were going to be judging us. With all these kids writing to us, we needed to be accountable to this, to what we were doing. So we started taking classes on anti-racism work and counseling and learning how to deal with kids who were experiencing all these really tough feelings. And all of it was going really well. We were touring across North America, getting radio play and on TV. It was amazing, more than I could ever hope or dream as a musician. But then all of it went downhill when I became friends with an attorney. His name was Spencer Trowbridge. He was an intellectual property attorney in Portland, Oregon. He's still a good friend of mine today, by the way. But he says, Simon, you're doing really awesome stuff with your band. Have you ever thought about applying to register your trademark? Right? Sounds expensive. He says, no. It's only going to take a few $100, and in a couple months, this whole thing's going to be behind you. So I said, I guess so, because it turns out having a trademark is really, really important if you're in a band. Like a lot of record companies and licensing agencies won't work with you unless you can protect your intellectual property rights. For example, I met the attorney for Destiny's Child and said, for the longest time, that wasn't their name. It was Destiny. But the label almost didn't sign them because they refused to change the name to something that could be registered as a trademark. It's probably worked out for them that they changed their name and got signed, I think. And so I said, all right, let's do this. A couple months later, it's spring 2010 now, and Spencer calls me up and he says, hey, Simon, we got a problem with your application. Now, I thought it was something that I had done incorrectly because he gave me this discount rate. He would knock off a few bucks if I started filling out the paperwork. He would check it and submit it. But he says, no. The application is fine, but the government is actually rejecting your trademark because they said your name is disparaging to persons of Asian descent. Wait, does disparaging mean what I think it means? Are they saying we're racist to Asian people? And he says, yeah. I'm like, do they know we're of Asian descent? He says, I think that's pretty obvious. I'm like, I didn't even know there was a law against this. What does it say? He proceeds to read me what's called Section 2A of the Lanham Act, which says you can't register trademarks that are considered scandalous, immoral, or disparaging. So in this case, disparagement. But it's not just what anyone considers disparaging. They have to find a substantial composite of the reference group to find it disparaging or offensive. So in this case, a whole lot of Asian American people got to be really upset and offended by our name. I take a deep breath. Man, we've been working with our community for 2 years now, all across this country. We work with over 100 different social justice organizations. Who did they find who's offended, who's hurt by our work? He says, nobody. Like, what? Wait, what do you mean nobody? You just told me they have to find a substantial composite. He says, no, nobody. They didn't find a single person. But they did quote urbandictionary.com. And there's photos of Miley Cyrus pulling her eyes back in a slant eye gesture. And of course, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. But he says, no, I'm looking at Miley Cyrus right now. It's pretty offensive. Like, yes, I know. Asian Twitter was already on that one. Like, you don't have to tell me. But I'm like, so you're telling me that the stuff you can't even use in a junior high classroom is now being used by the federal government to deny me rights? And he says, yeah, but I think they're wrong. I think we can appeal. I think we just show them all the work you've done. And I think it'll work out. So we begin appealing. Like, in the same way that anyone who ever got a rejection under 2A would appeal. Basically, you have to provide all this evidence that you're not offensive to yourself. So how do you do that? Well, we got, over the next year and a half, got letters, signed declarations, which were like affidavits or testimonies from executive directors of numerous Asian American organizations who said, the Slants don't disparage, they celebrate Asian identity. We demonstrated how every single Asian American newspaper, magazine, and TV show in the country loved promoting our work. They loved us. We also got a dictionary expert, like a professor at Duke University who wrote numerous textbooks on the origins of words. He was the editor at the New American Oxford Dictionary. That guy wrote a 70-page paper on the history of the term slant, showing how it, first of all, wasn't that offensive, because even in the height of its use in the 30s and 40s, like, it wasn't commonly used. There's a lot of Asian, like, slurs for Asian people out there, and most people prefer using other ones, essentially. But he also demonstrated how in the last few decades, more often than not, it was this term of self-empowerment. And we also got independent national surveys. Now, this is really important because the government, while they say they have to find a substantial composite, they don't actually define what substantial composite means. The only time they did that was in another case called Harjo v. Pro Football. In that case, the government said, it doesn't matter that 36.6% of Native Americans find the term redskin to be disparaging. That is not a substantial composite. In our survey, we found out that only 8% of Asian Americans had an issue with our name, so 92% were in favor of it. We thought, this is great. 8%, that is way less. We send all this into the government, and they reject it, saying, no, it's not good enough. UrbanDictionary.com says it's offensive. And they decided to quote from 2 white supremacist websites. They pulled out a dictionary, but it was from 1942. And it wasn't even an American English dictionary. It was a British slang dictionary. And they said, you can't have this. It's not good enough. With just a few keystrokes, they basically wiped away thousands of voices from the Asian American community saying, we know better than you. You don't get to have this right. In fact, they called our effort laudable, but not influential. This came in right before Christmas, and as part of this kind of Christmas gift I got from the government, Spencer says, you know what, Simon, law, it's really hard. I'm not going to renew my license next year. You're going to have to find somebody else to fight this thing. And so I remember looking around online, and there was this guy named Ron Coleman out of Hoboken, New Jersey, who wrote a blog about us. He had this blog called Likelihood of Confusion. And I was like, he seems like a smart guy. And he had these really cheesy logos all over his website that said, like, America's super lawyers or top IP lawyers or whatever. You know, you see them on the law firm websites all the time. I thought, well, maybe I'll give this guy a shot. So I write him, and he agrees to take the case up pro bono. He'll do the work for free as long as we cover the court fees. And he says, as long as you fight like this, you're not going to win. He says, nobody who has ever been charged with like violating this law has ever won on appeal. And think about that. The law has been around for over 70 years, and no one has ever appealed successfully. That's kind of weird. Like, it's kind of weird saying if you break this law, it doesn't matter, or even if you're accused of breaking it, you're never going to win. And I'm like, no, that can't be true, because I remember there's this other case, Dykes on Bikes, this lesbian motorcycle club out of San Francisco, California, this nonprofit group that did awesome work. They got their trademark. They were originally rejected, but they got it. He says, no, they didn't actually win on appeal. They only got it because the director of the office withdrew their objection over it. So there's no precedent set. So as long as you fight like this, you're not going to win. But he has a different idea, a new slant on this whole process. He called it the ethnic neutral application. In other words, we'll reapply. We won't tell them we're an Asian band. Maybe we'll get someone else in that office, a different examining attorney, who will get the application, not associate it with like the outdated slur, and just rubber stamp it, give us the trademark. So we reapply, and they give us the exact same examining attorney. Oh. That guy copies and pastes his previous rejection into the current one. Now at this point, I am furious. I'm so upset. Like, I can't believe it. We just got set back another 2 years. We started all over again. But Ron's actually excited. He says, no, we caught him. They just violated the Trademark Procedures Manual, which says you actually have to do a fresh search every time a new application comes in. He says, look, the guy didn't do it. All of the evidence used against you predates your actual application by 2 years. And on top of that, those search results were not neutral. They're biased. Because you can see in the screen caps, the only time he ever found anything offensive in connection with the word slant was when he wrote slant plus the word derogatory plus the N-word. But that's not how the government wrote it. And so he's like, we caught him. We're going to get him on these procedural and evidentiary issues. And at the same time, we started asking the trademark office some deep questions like, hold on a second, hold on. There have been over 800 applications for the term slant. Why is it that this band is the only one in U.S. history to be denied a registration for this word? How come everyone else was okay, but this band was not? Well, the trademark office wrote back and they said, you know, it's because the band is too Asian. Their exact words were, it is incontestable that the applicant is of Asian descent and part of an Asian band. Then they decided to prove how Asian we were. They're like, if you go to the slants.com, you're going to see Asian people all over that website. I was like, yeah, that's my face. that's my band. And then they're like, no, but if you look at the albums, There's dragons, there's rising suns, there's pagodas. It's way too Asian. You see, in their minds, they think if people see our faces and they see the words the slants, they're automatically going to think racial slur instead of any other definition for the word. And so therefore, we were denied. But if you think about it, that's just a more convoluted way of saying anyone can register the slants as long as they're not Asian. And in our particular incident, like if you were to actually chart this logic out, it would look something like this. Like the more Asian we became by adding more band members or artwork or something like that, the more racist or the more disparaging we were to, at least in the eyes of the government. And the problem was, we weren't just this band that happened to have some Asian dudes playing in it. The problem was that our band was like super duper Asian. You gotta remember, we were working in the Asian American community, doing anti-racism work on behalf of the US government. We were involved with Asian American organizations and raised money for all kinds of causes, worked on anti-bullying campaigns. In the eyes of the government, way too Asian. So that's the irony of it, right? In the name of fighting against racism, the government was denying me rights based on my race, because that's how much they cared about language. And so we fought them. And we lost every single round, all the way up to a place called the Federal Circuit, right below the Supreme Court. And at the Federal Circuit, the government said, you know what? We don't care that the Trademark Office used your race, your ethnicity as a basis for denial. We don't care that the search engine results were biased and that all the evidence was used before you even applied. We don't care about any of that stuff. At the Federal Circuit, they said, we only care about one thing. Does this law, Section 2A of the Lanham Act, violate the First Amendment? And there, we're like, yeah, we think so. Sure. And we lost there too, unanimously. But 5 days after that decision, the court did something really unheard of. It's called a sua sponte order to vacate. It basically means the court says, pretend that never happened. Pretend our opinion did not exist. We want to invite you to come back, and we want you to argue this case en banc before all 12 federal judges, so we could really talk about the Constitution and this law. In other words, I became a legal unicorn, because this happens like in 0.00015% of all cases or something like that. And as we made our way back to the Federal Circuit, we won. 9 out of 12 federal judges agreed with us that, yeah, Section 2A, that's unconstitutional under the First Amendment. Even 2 of the dissenting judges say, well, we don't think it was like unconstitutional, but we do think that the Trademark Office really messed up in this process, and the ban should have that registration. You see, what we found out was that we weren't the only people that had our identities used against us. The law had what's called disparate impact. If you think about it, who tends to reappropriate language? People of color, members of the LGBTQ community. But that only made us prime targets under the law. See, here's the thing. Like, if we were to be honest with ourselves, slant on the racism Richter scale is maybe like a 1.5. They're far more devastating racial slurs, especially for Asian Americans. And every single one was a registered trademark, except when Asian people applied. They were rejected. I found this happened over and over again throughout the years, no matter the community group and no matter the term. So we shone a light on this disparity, and the government really didn't like it. As a result of me winning at the Federal Circuit, the Trademark Office, along with their new friends, the Department of Justice, decided to sue me and take me here, the final boss stage in like this whole legal journey. You know, for me, I started this band because I wanted to address assumptions that people had about Asian Americans. And as this legal journey started unfolding more and more, I wanted to address assumptions about our power, our voice in terms of the legal system. And so there are certain things that you can't argue in court. Certain things that don't make sense. When you fight for the principle of something, it's really hard to turn those into actual legal arguments. But I'm all about symbolism. And so for me, I thought, if the government's gonna be arguing about what's offensive to Asian people, some Asian people better be up in there. So we crowdfunded our way there to make sure that we could get to Washington, D.C. to be there in person for oral arguments. And even though we couldn't argue in court, we could write music. We can say something about it. So we released a new album dedicating it to the US government by calling it The Band Who Must Not Be Named. And we kicked it off with a song called From the Heart, which is our open letter to the US Patent and Trademark Office, talking about the power of reappropriation.
No, we won't remain silent, no. It's such a funny moment. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. No, we won't be complacent, no. It's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart.
Much to the chagrin of my attorneys, we played that song on the steps of the US Supreme Court. But it's okay, because it was a holiday. That's the day we released our album. Another bit of symbolism, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And we spent that evening by going to the memorial. Now, this is actually my favorite place in Washington, D.C., especially at night, because Dr. King's quotes are carved into stone throughout and lit up. It's so inspiring, so stirring. That night, we went to the memorial and we played some songs and hung out with people celebrating the legacy of this civil rights leader. But I wanted to take a moment out for myself. And as I walked around and read each of the quotes and thought about them for some time, my eyes fell upon this quote by Dr. King. It happened to be my favorite one. It says, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And as I thought about it, I was like, at this point, I've been in this battle for 7 years. That moral arc, it's true, it does bend towards justice, but it doesn't bend on its own. It requires patience. It requires persistence. And it requires people who understand what their rights actually are and who are willing to fight for those rights, no matter what. And the night before we went to the Supreme Court, we were actually in Chinatown doing an interview for a journalist. And at the end of the meal, we get served fortune cookies. I was like, fortune cookies, this is kind of funny. Because I grew up in a Chinese restaurant. I remember looking at these things and thinking they were just kind of a little bit hokey. But that night, as I opened mine up, I thought, maybe there's something to this. The next morning, I wake up and we're on our way to the Supreme Court. Now, the building, it's got this Greco-Roman architecture all throughout it. It says equal justice under law right on the building as we pull up. And I thought, I hope this applies, because traditionally for people who look like me, that hasn't been true. The building looks like, it's like the Colosseum, like it's prepared for gladiator-like combat. And as we walk, everything's magnanimous. It's just like huge sculptures and marbles everywhere, reminding you how small you are. I get into the courtroom and Joe was next to me, and I remember whispering to him, "It's a lot smaller than I thought. Like the Federal Circuit, they had balcony seating. What's up?" As we sit down, I notice we're not anywhere near my attorneys. You see, there are 2 tables up front. That's where the attorneys argue from. Behind them are rows and rows of seats. They call it the members of the court section. They're basically for attorneys who paid extra to have the good seats. And then there's like a little barrier, and then there's pews. In the second row of that section, that's where we're seated. But you can hear this commotion. You can feel the fingers being pointed at us from behind us. 4 Asian dudes in suits. That must be the band. People start whispering and they start asking us questions, and turns out we are in the Slants. And so someone signals the court marshal, saying, hey, this is Tam. The case being argued today is Tam. This is him. Doesn't he at least get the front row of this section? He says, we'll have to check with the Solicitor General. The guy we're arguing against today? He goes, comes back 10 minutes later, looks at me and says, "I'm sorry, but we're saving the seat in case somebody important shows up today." Yo, why you gotta cut like that? Come on. It doesn't matter though, because the gavel strikes and it starts. And it's the weirdest thing, because I'm kind of like a Supreme Court junkie, an NPR fan. I love this stuff. I never imagined that I would hear my name being used by each of these justices and the name of my band as they're having this conversation with the Solicitor General. But it's not that exciting. I'm actually very, very angry, very frustrated. They're all using my name and the name of my band, but I have never felt so invisible. They're talking about how offensive we are to the Asian American community. And I was like, you don't know me. You don't know me. Like, you weren't there as we decided to dedicate 100% of the profits from our second album to address the disparities in cancer rates that Asian American women face. You weren't there as we raised enough money to rescue a family of refugees from North Korea. And you certainly weren't there as I talked to those kids who thought about taking their own lives because they're beaten so much at school. You don't deserve to use my name or the name of my band because you don't know me. I just felt so unheard. I mean, think about it. I'm here at the US Supreme Court fighting for freedom of speech, and I can't say a damn thing in that courtroom. They're arguing about what's offensive to Asian people, and the only Asian people in the room can't weigh in on the issue. And so all these thoughts are going through my head when about halfway through the arguments, this little voice pops up. It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She asked the Solicitor General, doesn't it matter? Doesn't it matter that everyone knows the Slants are Asian? They're not using the word to disparage, but to describe and to remove the sting from the term. And I just thought, yo, I'm in love with the Supreme Court justice. Notorious RBG bringing it. Like, she sees me. When all these people don't get it, she sees me. But then the only thing the Solicitor General can say in response is, well, we found a lot of articles on the internet that suggested otherwise. And I wanted to get up and say, no, you're talking about Urban Dictionary. You're talking about the white supremacist websites that you used. You're not talking about the voice of my community. How dare you? But of course, I can't say anything. And so 55 minutes pass, oral arguments are over, and I'm just a mess of emotions and anxiety. We're walking out of the building, and as we start heading down the steps, I notice the plaza. It's full. There's hundreds, maybe even thousands of people there. I'm like, man, the people there don't get it, and obviously these people don't get it. Like, court's in session today, there's no tours. What are they all doing here? Halfway down, the crowd, they look up at us. They see us walking, and they erupt in applause. They're cheering as we're walking down. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, and as I hit those final steps on the plaza, these two Asian kids run up to me. Simon, our parents, they let us ditch school to be here. Like, yo, what kind of Asian parents do you have? Like, no, you don't get it. We're from California. We flew here. We waited all night on that sidewalk so we can get in, but we didn't make it in. But we wanted to tell you that for our whole lives, we heard about you. We heard about the one who's willing to fight for the dignity of our community, for us to decide what's best for ourselves. We heard about your work. And because of that, even though we're only freshmen in high school, when we graduate college, we want to go into public policy development. We want to run for office, and we want to change the system. And it was at that moment I thought, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we win or lose at the courtroom. We won where it matters, in the hearts of the people most affected by the laws. Like, we started a movement. They're going to, even if we lose, they're going to take this and continue to carry it forward. And so my attorneys, they're like gathered in the corner of this courtyard of a bunch of reporters. There's microphones and cameras over there. I join them. And they look at me, and my attorneys are like, Simon, do you want to say something? I'm like, absolutely. I wanted to say the thing in the courtroom that no one else would say. I wanted to make the arguments that no one was willing to make. So I get up on the microphone, and I say, if the government truly cared about fighting against racism while using the Trademark Office to do so, why didn't they begin by canceling the registrations of the KKK, of Stormfront, of actual white supremacist groups? Why did they choose to wage this battle against an anti-racist band. It's because they don't actually care. They want to use bad language as a distraction from bad policy. But no one picked it up in the news that night. And so, because I felt so invisible, I wanted to do the only thing I could do, and that was to make as much noise as possible. Over the next few months, I crammed 75 appearances in 60 days, touring and going to every single law school, IP Bar Association, or any group that would have us, hoping that the clerks of the Supreme Court would have their ears to the ground and that they would hear our story. 6 months later, I wake up at 6 in the morning. My phone, it's going crazy. I missed 763 notifications. I guess something happened. I hop on Twitter and I see it's OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting, the same people that wrote that very first story about us turning stereotypes upside down across this country. They wrote, SCOTUS rules in favor of the slants. And later that day, I found out that decision was unanimous. And so now, 2 years later, we're touring across the country. We're speaking with students and law groups and that sort of thing. And it's so funny because oftentimes people ask me, like, oh, Simon, how do you win a Supreme Court case? Lawyers ask me this all the time. And I always say the same thing. It's easy. You just got to stop thinking like an attorney and start thinking like an artist instead. You see, attorneys, they focus on what's possible. They look at history. They're like, well, here's the case law. I'm like, no. First, begin with the kind of world that you want to create. Then work out the steps to get there. Think about what your ultimate idea of justice is. For me, it's one where we have rules that everyone would agree to, no matter who was in charge. And that means protecting our constitutional rights, things like freedom of speech, even when it hurts. Because that's how you're guaranteed to have these rights when you need them the most. For me, this journey has been all about a name that was worth fighting for. And that name was the Slants. So, thank you so much.